Mohan Guruswamy is a distinguished fellow at the ORF. He's joining us with some thoughts. Very good afternoon to you, Mr. Guruswamy. Thanks so much for joining us here on the show. I'm not sure if you could listen into the brief press briefing that was given by Timothy Geithner and by Mr. P. Chidambaram. But, I guess at occasions like this, one can't expect anything more than generalities about the importance of the US-India relationship, and particularly now, increasingly, the US-India economic ties. Anything interesting that you picked up, if you could hear into that briefing?
Well, like you said, all this is all in generalities, but the important thing is that they both came. This is not very often that a Treasury Secretary and the Chairman of the Fed to come to India together. Obviously, they attach a lot of importance to this visit and to the Indian economy. There's a lot of things they must have discussed which they can't talk outside. But I think the main issues still remain the recovery of Europe, where the whole world has got a vested interest, because the European Union economy is as big as the US economy. And if Europe is sick, the world economy cannot become healthy. So I think we all have a vested interest in Europe becoming healthy and getting its act together. And I think they must have discussed some coordination in the next meeting of the IMF and the World Bank later this week.
So just wondering, the Finance Minister mentioned this is the third meeting under the current partnership program, which was launched in April 2010. I'm just wondering, over that period of time, have you seen any noticeable differences, particularly on the economic ties between India and the US? Because one doesn't see it in the numbers. One doesn't see it in the trade numbers, for instance. One doesn't see it in decreased rhetoric around outsourcing, for instance. Just two examples. But are there other aspects that you would highlight where you have seen an improvement in relations?
But I think IT services have been going up in spite of all the talk of on outsourcing and making outsourcing a whipping boy. I think IT services are going up, and the US market is still the most important market for India, because apart from, if you had IT services and you had merchandise exports, it becomes a very large market, and it's also a source of a lot of capital. It forms world opinion on investment potential of India. So I think the US as a whole is, continues to be of paramount interest to us. And the sooner we mend our image there, and sooner we fix our relations, the better.
Sir, one always is tempted to say that there would be a China element to all of this. Somewhere at the back of the mind, the need to counter China. Although if you look at it purely from an economic standpoint, I think India would be far, far away in any economic parameter from being able to counter the importance of China on the world economy, whether it's in terms of ability to invest in treasuries, whether it's in terms of providing a market for US goods and services. From that standpoint, while that would probably be an afterthought or one aspect of this need to build a relationship with India, probably not the dominant aspect?
I'm sure that that would have been the top of their agenda. But the fact is that, it's the US-China trade imbalance which has caused this present problem. Because of huge trade deficits, the Chinese have been able to build up huge US reserves in US currencies, and to some extent with the European Union. And I think this trade needs to be rectified, because the international system is based on balanced trade. And at Bretton Woods also they said that good sense will prevail and there would be balanced trade between countries. But not so in the case of the US. The Chinese have been, instead of taking the money back home, have been investing it in US treasuries and leaving the money in US banks, often for no interest. And that has become a source of cheap credit and has spurred these toxic loans and all these things in the US. So I think that issue has to be dealt with. And I think President Obama has made it very clear that within the next 5 years, there would be no trade deficit with China. That would be the first step towards getting us back onto the road to good health. And I'm sure they have spoken about that, because that does not mean that you're trying to sort out China, but except that the Chinese-US trade has gone out of kilter completely. And the US has to learn to balance its budgets. And I think they will take time, as they're withdrawing from Iraq, they're withdrawing from Afghanistan. I think they'll be able to save money, and there have been huge cuts in the Pentagon budgets, and also they'll be balancing their books. And I think that's a good start. Yeah.
Fair enough. So just looking ahead, just a quick final question on areas where you think
when they balance the trade, the Chinese will get the whammy. Yeah?
No, absolutely. That's one area where they've been cooperating even at multilateral agencies. So IMF, World Bank discussions, the US and the Indian side have always been together on that one. So just as I was saying, talking about what lies ahead in terms of areas where there can be substantial improvement of economic relations. I mean, defense was one sector which was talked about as one potential area where investment flow can be much higher. Now we're looking at retail, insurance, etc., where FDI limits have been hiked. And then there are the other aspects of terror financing, etc., where there seem to be some element of cooperation coming. Those or any others that you think are particularly important?
I think first of all, once we allow somebody to come in with 49%, I don't see what the sanctity of 49% is. If they are in, let them come in. Let them come in with 75%. Let them come in with 100%. Doesn't matter. And I think as far as defense is concerned, we import 70% of our consumption of capital equipment. And I think if you have joint venture factories making them in India, we should insist on joint venture factories making them in India. And at least, to that extent, we indigenize production. We get that technology into the country. And there's no reason why we should stick to the sacred cow that, they should be only 26% and less foreign participation in the defense sector. Now, there are other issues. For instance, there are some things we need to sort out. The US, for instance, the federal government has about 86 billion worth of IT outsourcing, IT work-related, contracts it gives out within the US. Indian companies like TCS, Infosys, and Wipro, they are kept out of this. I think we should be allowed into this trade because that amounts to a kind of discrimination. And there's the issue of social service, social security taxes, which are deducted even if you spend 2 months in the US. And that translates to about 1.2 billion a year. And that's a lot of money. And it amounts to a kind of taxation of doing business in the US. And to that extent it is discriminatory. And, I think these issues need to be sorted out. It's just not India which has to give. And I think the US also has to give here. And I hope they have discussed these things this morning.
All right. I wish we'd had more insight into what was discussed. But, thanks so much, sir, for your impressions about how important this meeting is. As you started by saying, the fact that Timothy Geithner and Ben Bernanke are here together. And I must say, once again, this is the first time that a sitting Fed chairman has actually visited India. That in itself is important.
India's #1 news app just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for Retina display. Full screen view, faster response time, and Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.